Hey traders, Jason here from Leavitt Brothers. So in this video, I want to talk about what stocks led the market in the 2000s. Okay, so the 2000s overall was considered a dead decade. The market topped in 99, early 2000, and it took more than a decade for the S&P to get back to its high. So I want to look at what stocks did well during the decade so that we can compare it to what stocks did well in the 1990s. Okay. And this comes off of, this is my YouTube channel. I've recently done a couple videos that are highlighted here about what stocks did well in the 90s. And I talked about how stocks that do well in one bull market tend not to repeat and do well in the next bull market. So this is kind of an extension of those two videos. First, I covered what did well in the 1990s. Now I'm going to cover what different stocks did well in the 2000s. All right, so let's go through some here. So here's Apple. You've probably heard of it before. So here's the 1990s. 1990s all the way through, say, 2004, 2005-ish. Other than this run up here in 1999 where it came right back down, the stock was completely dead money. So remember, the 1990s were a great time for the market. Okay, tech stocks were running crazy. Internet companies came around in the middle of the decade. Apple absolutely did not participate at all, and it wasn't until like 2004, 2005 where it started to perk up, and then of course it's been one of the greatest success stories in history since then. So a stock that absolutely did not participate in the 90s ended up being one of the biggest winners in the 2000s. Stock AMED, similar situation. Stock goes public in 1994, generally drifts down all the way into the millennium. Did not participate at all in the 90s bull market, just very quietly formed a base, and then in late 2003 breaks out over here. Volume gets kind of strong, and it ends up being one of the decade's biggest winners. Amazon, okay, I'm going to take a couple comments about this. Number one, the stock goes public and did really well, and then of course it gave everything back, and then once it bottomed in 2001-ish, then it ended up being one of the biggest winners of the decade, but it took some time. This is a stock that went public and then gave it all back, so it really didn't participate that much in the 90s, okay, because it went public so late. It just kind of got caught up in all the euphoria, but it eventually turned around and became one of the decade's biggest winners, starting in 2001. So remember this chart. I'm going to comment on it again in a minute. Here's Booking.com, which at the time was Priceline, another stock which did not lead in the 90s. It went public, it went up a little bit, but immediately it just kind of drifted down. It spent several years doing nothing, and then out of nowhere, 2006, we started getting some volume over here. And we got steady volume in 2007. Obviously, it broke out, came back down, tested the monthly 50, and then became one of the decade's biggest winners. So a stock that came on board late and didn't help the market in the 90s and didn't get helped by the market in the 90s ended up becoming one of the 2000s biggest winners. Here's Clean Harbors, another stock that this is 1990 right here. So for the decade of the 90s, the stock pretty much, obviously it didn't do anything. It just kind of drifted down and spent many, many years at a low, all the way until 2002, broke out, came back down, tested, came up, sat above its monthly 50, and then it became one of the decade's biggest winners. So a stock that absolutely did not participate in the 90s, just spent more than a decade doing absolutely nothing, ended up becoming a giant winner. Salesforce.com wasn't even public in the 90s. It went public in 2004. You can see, this is like this is not dealing with splits and stuff. So back here, you can see the stock was at like, 10, 15 bucks over here. Stock went up over 1,000% between 2004, 2012, and of course it's much higher now. Here's Deckers, went public in 1993, spent the entire decade plus a few more years doing absolutely nothing. Breaks out in 2003, volume super strong, comes up, tests the 50-month moving average, and then becomes one of the decade's biggest winners. Okay, so again, a stock that absolutely did not participate in the 90s became one of the 2000s biggest winners. DVA went public in 1995, shot up, and then in the second half of the 90s, when the market was just up, there were some glitches in there with the long-term capital management and stuff. But the stock at that time was just going down, and when all the stocks were at their all-time highs in late 99, 2000, this stock was at its all-time low. What happened after that? Well, it went up over 1,000% following that. It was one of the decade's biggest winners. Here's Google. Wasn't even public in the 90s. Went public at 100, went up over 700%, came back down in the financial crisis, and then it went back up. And of course, this is December 31st, 2009. Obviously, it's much higher now. So a company that wasn't even public ended up being one of the biggest winners the following decade. Here's Illumina. Okay, went public, as you can see, back in 2000. Not the greatest time to go public. Dropped, I don't know what it is, probably 90-95%, based for a couple years, and then ended up doing this, rallying over 1,000% and becoming one of the decade's biggest winners. MasterCard, mature company, went public in 2006, went up a bunch, came back down during the financial crisis, went back up, and this, of course, obviously the stock here we are 10 years later is up significantly more than this. Okay, so again, a stock that didn't even exist in the 90s, or at least didn't exist as a publicly traded company, was one of the big winners in the 2000s. Monster Beverage, at the time, this was like Hansen Natural Soda. This stock spent more than a decade doing absolutely nothing. And then over here in 2003, it starts to perk up, and then 2004, it really started moving. And this stock, over the course of several years, went up over 6,000%. It was one of the decade's biggest winners. Okay, did not participate in the 90s, biggest winner of the 2000s. Here's NEU. So as you can see, during the 2000s, flat and just down, and then it ended up turning around and going up more than 1,000% in the 2000s. Netflix, this one looks like Amazon, where it went public, came up, came back down, based, and then ended up becoming one of the decade's biggest winners, and of course it went much higher than this. Southwestern Energy, another stock that was just completely dead money, absolutely did not participate in the 90s, but then the stock started inching up, broke out to a new high, volume ramping up here, and it was one of the biggest winners in the 2000s. All right, so some key takeaways here. Okay. One, stocks rarely lead in consecutive bull markets. Okay, the big leaders in the 90s, like Cisco, AOL, Microsoft, Dell, they did not lead in the 2000s. Okay, it's very rare for the same company to lead in consecutive bull markets. So the stocks that have done really, really well the last 10 years are probably not going to be among the leaders going forward. Okay, so because of this, don't be so eager to rush back into old winners. Okay, stocks like PayPal or Square that did extremely well and have fallen hard, don't be so quick to rush back in and say, hey, this stock used to be at 300, now it's at 180, I'm going to buy it. That stock might take a decade to get back to its highs. Okay, you could probably, at best, you probably are going to need a couple years of basing before it then breaks out from a stage 1 base and enters a stage 2 uptrend. But for now, because stocks rarely lead in consecutive bull markets, I would not be so eager to rush back into some of those old winners. Okay, the next crop of big winners are probably quietly basing right now, or they're not even public yet. Okay, they probably didn't even participate in the bull market over the last 10 years, 12 years, whatever it is. And at some point in time when the market bottoms, and I think we're going to go down much more here, and it's going to last well into the summer, but at some point in time when the bear market that we're currently in ends, stocks that you're not even paying attention to, that nobody pays attention to, that are just quietly basing, volume probably isn't very high, they're going to suddenly break out in strong volume. And those are the stocks that could go 1,000% over the following couple of years. It's not going to be the stocks, it's not going to be PayPal or Square. It's not going to be the old winners. Okay. Or they're going to be companies that are not even public yet. Okay. One caveat or side note here is that stocks that went public recently can lead in the next bull market, even if they've suffered a big loss. Okay, so while I'm excluding old winners such as PayPal and Square, I'm open-minded about recent IPOs such as Palantir. The reason is because they just went public at the wrong time. They went public, they got caught up in the euphoria of the market going up. They went up a bunch, then they came back down. It's possible that they base for a little while and then go back up. This is what happened to Amazon that went public and went straight up and straight down. It based a little bit and then it was a big winner. It happened to Netflix. It went public. It went straight up and straight down. It based and then became one of the decade's biggest winners. Okay, so it's possible. So I'm going to leave the door open for any stock that went public in the last year that just got caught up in the euphoria and then gave it all back. It's possible for those to lead. Okay, so hope you got something out of this. It's food for thought. A lot of the tendency is to rush back into some of the old names that did well. Some of those old names are going to become the next AOL or Cisco, and it's going to take them a while to come back if they ever come back. The next crop of big winners are probably quietly basing right now, or they're not even public, or maybe they went public recently and they've suffered a 60, 70, 80% drop. They too need to base for a little while before breaking out and starting a new stage 2 uptrend. All right, hope you got something out of this. Give it a like, subscribe to the channel here to be alerted of new content. See you next time.